Hey everybody, before we start the episode, just wanted you to know that after the interview, there will be an exclusive clip from James Andrew Miller's Origins, where he speaks with Michael Patrick King. That's right, that Michael Patrick King. Big thanks to James Miller's Origins and Cadence 13 for the clip, and make sure to check out their podcast. Take it away, Katie.
You're now listening to The Bradshaw Boys, a podcast where three relatively grown men binge the iconic HBO series Sex and the City. So dust off those DVDs and grab yourself a white wine or even a Cosmopolitan and settle in. Take it away, boys.
Welcome to The Bradshaw Boys, a podcast where three guys watch their way through Sex and the City for the first time ever, mostly. I'm Cory Cavin.
I'm Kevin James Doyle.
I am Jon Sieber.
And we are really excited today. We have a great guest with us. He's the host of Origins with James Andrew Miller. Please welcome our guest, Jim Miller.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for
Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you. We have a lot of guests on the show that know a lot about Sex and the City. I feel like you are probably the most studied guest of Sex and the City we've ever had.
I've never seen the show.
Well, there we go. Okay, well, we're done. Thanks so much for being here.
Sounds good.
It's all been one big fake.
You're actually like you're the probably the biggest person in my life who has just utterly destroyed the Kevin Bacon game of my life. That I'm like, imagine the connection. That it's like after we're talking, I'm just like, I'm 1 degree away from everyone.
Everyone.
It's
Very
like,
true.
Wait, unpack that for me. What do you mean?
well, like, you know, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon if
Yes.
you do in movies, but in your own life, if I'm like, oh, Cory knows this guy,
Right.
therefore I'm connected to him. It's like you've interviewed so many huge, massive people.
So you Origins is the podcast that you host, and you've done you did a season on Saturday Night Live, you did a season on Alabama football, a season on ESPN,
Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Curb Your Enthusiasm,
Little show called Sex and the City.
tiny little show that we love, and
And
you've also an author of books, Live from New York, the Saturday Night Live oral history book, if I can call it that. One of my favorite books.
Oh, thank you.
A book on CAA, I believe.
Entertainment business, yes.
So like
And ESPN.
and ESPN. So like Kevin said, you've met everyone.
I tried to like do research on the Sex and the City season, and I was just like, fuck this. Curb Your Enthusiasm's my favorite show of all time. I'm not gonna waste all my time listening to the Sex and the City episodes. But
I actually interviewed Kevin Bacon for the CA book.
oh really?
Really?
Oh my god.
1 degree. It's 1 degree.
1 degree. Game over.
We're now officially.
You play the opposite game. Play six degrees of someone that he doesn't know.
Yeah.
You know, like Barb Doyle. How many connections is it from your mom?
Do you know?
Kevin's mom.
So my first question is, how'd you get the idea for the podcast, and then why was Curb Your Enthusiasm your first choice?
Well, I think that the podcast for me was actually it had two kind of interesting propositions. One was, I think podcasting itself is just there's another dimension that you get from the whole storytelling narrative thing that I try and do with the books. And this way, with podcasts, you actually get to hear the people talking and their rhythms, and they showcase their sensibilities in different ways. You read an interview in People magazine with Sarah Jessica Parker, and the words will make sense, but it's not like sitting down with her and just hearing her laugh or hearing how she forms her thoughts. And so I think it's quite raw. And the second thing was that, not to be corny, but I really believe that good news travels slow. I thought that was the whole idea of Origins, which is there's a lot of great shit happening out there. There's a lot of great success stories. And, I'd rather focus on them. As for Curb Your Enthusiasm, I guess part of it was timing, because just as I started to decide to do this show, Larry had decided he was going to come back. Remember, there was a big hiatus. And so I had interviewed him for the SNL book and a couple times. And and I love a lot of those people and particularly the writers. And so just thought that would be a great way to kick it off. I mean, it's a very indulgent podcast in the sense that I only do things that I love. So people from time to time suggest ideas for chapters of the podcast. And I just feel like there's such, it's like climbing Everest on a cold day in your shorts because, not to complain, I'm happy to do the work, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so if you don't really love it, then I'm just not a good enough actor. I don't want to fake it.
Yeah. I thought too, like the mystery behind how things get made. I remember when Lord of the Rings was coming out, I remember Peter Jackson talking about how important the DVD extras were. And I was a kid when that was coming out and I was like, literally, oh my gosh, this blows my mind. And now with podcasts and stuff, the doors have just been blown off. Like if you're an actor or a writer or something, like how do you do that? And like listening to some of the episodes of your podcast, it was cool being like, oh, this is how that person got here. And it's actually really inspiring. Like I listened to one of the SNL interviews with Lindsay Shookus, who's a producer at SNL. And you see people like that and you're like, how do you get that job? And then to hear the person talk in your ears like, this is what I did. You're like, oh, I'm marking that down. You just, and it's actually really inspiring seeing how it's like the opposite of the sausage getting made. It's like watching like a beautiful like tapestry get made and you're like, okay, that's cool.
To that degree, next week, we're releasing Origins Originals, which are basically not cut up. They're the individual one-on-one interviews. And Michael Patrick King, who is who was the showrunner for Sex and the City and wrote and directed the movies, his interview, this has nothing to do with me, but if you're going to listen to one of those originals, I believe it or not, I would listen to his because it is a masterclass in how to run a show, the creative process in terms of writing scripts, how a gay man is able to have such a unbelievable sense and port of entry into a show about 4 women and a show about 4 women who are heterosexuals at that. It's like one of the things that I wanted to do is trace the pedigree of like, how does that happen? Darren Star was gay who created the show. Then Michael Patrick King took over. So you might think that that's a synapse, right? What's the disconnect there? How do they pull that off? And Michael Patrick King, it is a tour de force. This guy, the way he talks, it's just beautiful.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I listened to some of the live Sarah Jessica Parker one, and that was another little mystery thing that got unlocked that was like, oh, she must be so brilliant. So she decided she's so savvy in business. She became a producer. And instead it was Darren King that was like, just hang around and figured it out. And then
Darren Star.
Darren Star. Yeah. And she basically is like, yeah, I just like hung around and like went to all the meetings and figured out how to produce. And you're like, oh, you think of her as such an icon being like, when she was 12, she was probably like, I'm going to produce one day. And instead you're like, oh no, you just like put the work in and meet the people. And it was,
she was smart about Darren was smart, first of all, because when he was trying to talk her into taking the job, he said, cause she was, she didn't know if she wanted to get committed to a show for year in, year out. And he said, you could produce the show. And she's like, I hadn't thought about that. And so Darren was smart about that. And then she was smart about the fact that even at the beginning when she was quote unquote producer on the show, she did a lot of listening. Somebody else, Sarah Jessica's, she really is just a lovely, smart person. And somebody else in her position would have been throwing their weight around season 1. I'm a producer on the show, and she just kind of like took her time and really managed it very well.
That's awesome.
It's interesting to hear how in one of the episodes too, how everyone how they knew each other from acting world. Like in the Willie Garson interview, he was talking about how he booked the pilot and he'd booked another pilot. And then he heard in the audition room, someone was like, I think Sarah Jessica Parker's going to play. And he was like, so I just went home and called her and I was like, I might do this show. And she was like, I might do this show. And they were like, okay, well, let's give it a shot and do it together. And then it all kind of happened. But it was so interesting that it seemed like the beginning of the show, none of them thought it was a big deal. And then it blew in, or none of the actors, I guess. And then
the interesting thing about that was that it's very much an outlier for nowadays in particular, but they shot the entire first season without it going on the air.
Really?
Wow, I didn't know that.
So can you imagine they're in this kind of like bubble where they've done it and they have no sense. First of all, remember something. There's no Twitter. There's no Instagram. There's no kind of feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
And addition to that, they don't even, there's nobody like, there's no ratings, there's no critics, there's no anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was a very interesting dynamic because they all kind of like just had to believe in it before they got any feedback.
Yeah, that really speaks to the like strong concept of the show.
Totally.
Going in there to the creators.
What was the do you know the biggest news that broke from the podcast? From what I looked, it looked like the biggest news that you broke. I have a news story, but I wanted to know if you saw what it was.
It was
what your opinion was.
me coming to Brooklyn tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen,
that's going to break the internet. That's going to be all over Twitter.
That's the forget about Kim Kardashian nude. I think I guess the idea that in the third movie, Mr. Big was going to have a heart attack in the shower.
Yeah.
And other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
Yeah. My phone buzzed that morning like 12 times from friends that know we do the podcast, and they're like, "This is crazy. Did you know that?" And I was like, "Ah." So that was big news. Very controversial.
Very
Well,
controversial.
I thought, I got so sick of people saying, well, it's been around for 20 years. How are you going to, make any news or, make yours different? And I was really thrilled that the people on the show and people involved in the show and people at HBO were calling and saying they really loved it, and they and some people said, "Oh, I didn't even know that, and I didn't know this, and I didn't know that."
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of nice.
That's awesome.
I want to shift the focus from the podcast and Sex and the City to you specifically. So you obviously studied the show, and when you were putting the podcast together. Did you watch the show when it was on, and what was your particular experience with Sex and the City like? Just you.
So it used to be appointment viewing with on Sunday nights when I was with the mother of my 3 children, and we would watch it together, and I very much enjoyed it. And then I have to say, though, the real inspiration for this chapter came from the fact that my daughter Sophie loved the show so much, and she would just watch it and watch it and watch it, and I would have to be. It was a little sketchy because I would be, Dad, come in and watch it with me. It's like, okay, what episode is this? Because I just you don't want to be with your daughter on some of these episodes. It just made my teeth hurt. So I think that if it was an episode that, I quickly, sometimes she was watching them for the first time, and back when she was, that was a whole other thing too, which is like, okay, the good news is your 16-year-old daughter, is following your tradition. She loves film and she loves television. When she was 4 years old, she was, Singing in the Rain and every single kind of movie and the great TV shows exposed her to, and it was just wonderful. And it was great that she was so into it. But your 16-year-old daughter's watching Sex and the City. It's like, oh God, okay, there's the toothpaste is out of the tube. And it's one thing for her to watch it, and it's another thing to watch it with her. So I, particularly when she was watching it for the first time, I think there were a couple cases where I would walk in and it would be like a race between me trying to figure out what episode it was, trying to calculate what the hell happens in this episode, and whether to get out of Dodge before something on the screen before that was going to make me car sick. And,
that's so funny.
Oh, man.
So there's a lot of calculation involved.
That's fantastic.
Somebody joked around, I think it was Kristen or Cynthia, it was Noth. It was Chris Noth, when now it's replayed not just on HBO Go, but on television. So they have to cut it. So it's more like Love in the City.
Right.
Because they took all of the, some of the stuff out of it. But
that's how so many people that we've had as guests on this podcast were first introduced to it, was that they would see it on, I think it was USA or something like that. But it was cut down to where it was really
the episodes
tame.
must have been like 2 minutes long.
I was going to say, there's no way. They had to have really long commercial breaks. In the
it must have been like the 4 of them at brunch saying, we'll take 4 Cosmos, and then we'll go to Magnolia Bakery, and those two scenes can stay, and then everything else.
It's weird. Samantha wasn't in that episode at all.
She hasn't been in the last 10 episodes.
She didn't say a word.
Where is she?
There's no character named Samantha.
Anyway,
on
we
USA.
should get to the episode tonight.
We should. So
Special episode.
So tell me what episode we're watching.
No ifs, ands, or buts with
right.
2 T's.
Oh, okay.
Are you familiar with this episode?
Season 3, episode 5.
We've heard that we meet. A very important person.
You meet a very important person in this episode.
And we heard that there's an issue that comes up with Carrie. We've heard a few little things about it. It seems like an important episode.
Well, let's just talk about architecture for a second, because one of the things that Michael Patrick King talks about, there's a formula to the Sex and the City scripts.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great things is that you watch the show and you're really not aware of the formula. But then when you think about it afterwards, you realize, oh shit, there's a formula to the show.
Yeah.
There's, it's like it took people like 4 seasons into Seinfeld to realize what Larry was doing, which is there's a Kramer storyline and there's a Elaine storyline
Right.
and there's a George storyline. It's a little bit like that here. And the thing that you're going to see in this episode, correct me if I'm wrong, is actually it harkens back to the original conceit of what Darren Star wanted to do. Because remember something, if you look at Sex and the City, the book that Candace wrote,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, am I getting too much in the weeds here?
No, this is great.
Fantastic.
So there's not a TV show there. There's a lot of verisimilitude. She captures the zeitgeist of single life at that time in New York City. And because there was a real Mr. Big, Mr. Big, and you got her. And so in a way you have Carrie, but the construct of the show wasn't there. In fact, at one point, somebody they were thinking about doing the show as kind of like Love American style, where it'd be like just different things happening in the city all over the place.
Yeah.
Right? So one of the things that Darren did very well was he came up with these 3 archetypal women, right? And so once he came up with the 3 of them, they were vehicles for Carrie then to process the ubiquitous question, which would kind of frame every episode. And each one of them was coming from a different point of view. And so one of the things that I talked about with Michael and Darren was the idea that you could never take a line of dialogue. And this is why this show I think it works because it's specific.
Mm-hmm.
You could never take a line of dialogue for Samantha and give it to Charlotte.
Right.
You could never give it to, it's really interesting, right? And so I think that the fact that those 3 paths are there and then Carrie has to kind of process it all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be alive and well in this episode that, that we're going to see now. And it's
Fantastic.
And the car crash at the end of it when they all die. I don't want to give anything else away, but
Well, Jim, you came all the way to Brooklyn to just sit down and watch some TV, so let's go do it.
okay. All right. Where's the Wagyu steak in the cab?
We're getting it out. It's coming off the grill right now.
Episode 35. No ifs, ands, or buts. Carrie smoking becomes a problem when she goes on her first date with Aidan Shaw. Miranda makes more time for Steve in her life. Charlotte dates the worst kisser she's ever met. And Samantha dates a black man whose sister does not agree with their interracial relationship. And now, back to the boys.
We're back. No ifs, ands, or buts.
Wow. Big episode.
I feel
Huge
like
episode.
Big episode with no big.
no big,
Ooh,
but
big.
man, just like, met the expectations.
Yeah.
It was, John, do you want to do the rundown of the plot and then we can get
I'll
into
do
it?
the rundown. So I think the through line of this episode was
Deal breakers.
When does when does dating become so dump friendly? Like what are the deal breakers in relationships, and have they become too soon? Are they too aggressive? And I guess the stories were Charlotte had the bad kisser.
Mm-hmm.
Samantha was dating the black dude Siobhan, whose sister didn't want them together. Miranda and Steve had some half court shot. wasn't taking what he wanted too seriously. And lastly, smoking with Aidan and Carrie.
And then also Stanford had a storyline too. He was dating the guy with the creepy dolls.
Yeah.
And is that a deal breaker? And
Yeah.
Carrie had also said in relationships, do the stocks rise, or is there a time you need to liquidate your stocks?
Yes.
And what would be your deal breaker? One thing that I thought was interesting is before we went and saw it, Jim, you had said, Darren Star and Michael Patrick King, like there was a formula of how these shows are supposed to go, and you don't really understand that it's happening. And we've seen a bunch of episodes recently that I think have been good episodes, not great ones, or some that was like, oh, that was good. But this one, everyone had a solid story. There were 5 solid storylines.
It was the exact thing that we talk about when we like a good episode.
Yeah.
They all come together. They all have their own thing.
I want to point out something funny is that he said that every single character has their own dialogue and it would never work with a different character.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
And Charlotte, of course, when they were talking about Siobhan, and she burst in with saying "big black cock," which is a very Samantha thing to say, and how when she actually said it, it was a joke. She would never say that seriously.
Yeah.
And that was actually the joke, was that he had a big black heart.
And
so I thought that was super interesting.
Well, but her point was she knew what Samantha was going to
good.
say.
Yeah.
But
It wasn't like Charlotte was saying that. She was like, oh my God, I know where you're going with
exactly.
Right, right.
It was a very interesting scene, especially, I don't think I would have ever picked that up had we not had that conversation.
That's true.
So
That what we like to call, what someone gave us this phrase, but what they call the chat and choose, which is like the it's their like diner conversations where the 4 ladies sit around. Or Jennifer Cation Armstrong, she wrote a book on Sex and the City. She calls it the Socratic dialogues they have. But that one was like exceptionally witty and well written. Like there was the whole thing where like there was the Charlotte saying oh, you're gonna say he has a big black cock, and Samantha said no, I was gonna say he had a big heart, and then she said the thing about like, are you gonna diss him? And Miranda's like, I hope you didn't say diss. And there was like so much like rapid fire dialogue that there was just so much.
King.
Yeah, the writing was
so
incredible
well
in this
written,
episode.
that episode.
Yeah, we've had some guests come on and like talk about how sometimes if there's like a political thing or like a cultural thing that it doesn't land quite, maybe it doesn't stand the test of time. But I felt like all that stuff, even that storyline with Samantha and the guy, like that was, I mean, I thought they nailed it. I thought it was really great.
That was an interesting.
So this is one of the things that I asked all 3 women and Michael Patrick. If this show was being done now, how much of it could stand the test of time?
Yeah.
Apart from the fact that the cast itself would be changed because it was for white women and for straight white women at that. So let me ask you guys, are there any aspects of this show that you think are, let's say, don't stand the test of time?
Well, this episode, it would have been Martha Stewart meets Puff Daddy to describe the restaurant, because Martha Stewart's pretty gangster now herself. So
She's on the show with Snoop Dogg.
Yeah.
Well, we talk about this on the show though, and we've actually had some of our listeners talk about it. The whole thing of like what you said, it's for straight white women, and there is one thing we talk about is the most New York thing and the least New York thing in the show. And I think if the show was made now, you would see more of the diverse, real New York City in quotes, meaning like there are a lot of high-end restaurants. They all live in New York City. You don't see a lot of deli guys that are immigrants, or you don't see a lot of like people that are not exactly like them. So I think
which is something that Chris knows, by the way. You'll hear if you listen to his one-on-one interview that I did with him, he really laments.
Really?
He really takes the show to task for.
Interesting.
Because, I mean, the disparity of wealth that exists within New York City is something that really wasn't reflected in the show. I mean, you had a couple, when you really go down the rabbit hole of money in the show. I mean, this is why I thought it was so fascinating to talk to Patricia Field, because I said to her, look, at some point, Carrie is writing this column, and how does she afford all these $600 pair of shoes? And she said, I do not care about that. I do not want reality to seep into that. And so they had made that Faustian bargain. But also in terms of like, they're out at these places all the time and the coolest places. And I mean, those Cosmos alone are just pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And stuff like
I mean,
that.
if this show was shot today, it might have been the same back then, but like a Cosmo at a lot of those bars would cost them $18, $19 because that's just what cocktails are at crazy expensive restaurants. And
30.
Yeah.
In
and
those places.
28,
Yeah.
30.
Well, yeah, like
and they're throwing them back. Yeah.
I think I guess it depends on what you mean by what anyone means when they stand the test of time, because like I don't want to go too far back, but Shakespeare, but it's like there are all male casts in Shakespeare. Okay, those plays stand the test of time. There's things that they don't get right, but television is different and casting is different, not because the show like failed. It's because it's so iconic that it's like it's kind of so.
No, that's what I didn't mean. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's not what I meant by stand the test of time. Actually, on Sunday, this will be next week. Well, people can still see it online. Willie Geist has just done a big interview with Jerry Seinfeld. It airs this Sunday on the Today Show, so if people are listening to this next week, they could go look at it online. One of the things that Willie gets into with Jerry quite a bit is this whole idea that the comedic landscape is getting smaller and smaller because of so many things are politically incorrect.
Right.
And so part of what I say about the landscape, for instance, I do think that the quote angry black woman that was evidenced in this episode,
Yeah.
that would not be written like that now.
That would be handled in a different way.
it would be handled in a different way.
But I don't want to bury the lead because I think that one of the things that's extraordinary about this episode and so important when you look over the entire course of the series, okay, all the seasons together, what they've done in this particular episode, I'm honored to have been here for this episode, by the way,
Thank you.
is they've introduced this character of Aidan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty big matzo ball because what we've decided, what they've decided is that, look, we know what Mr. Big represented.
Right.
And he represented a lot of interesting things for Carrie. And I mean, there was both a boon and a bane to his existence,
Yeah.
right? I mean, there was aspirational and there was that whole level of success. I mean, I asked Sarah Jessica and Darren Star if Mr. Big had been a public school science teacher, would Carrie have been as attracted to him? And the answer was a resounding no.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, what does that suggest about Carrie? And what is it? But now what we've done is, you know, I used that word archetypes before. We've now gone 180 degrees from Mr. Big. And so we have Nature Boy.
Yeah.
We have a guy who's in jeans and a jean top. And now it's the beginning of an incredible journey for Carrie as a young woman and trying to understand like what she really wants and who she wants and what does that say about her. And I think that to me is the most exciting thing about this episode because they went so deep with Mr. Big,
Yeah.
right? I mean, coming out of the book itself that Darren optioned, Mr. Big was a very, very clear, I mean, one could argue even more, well, maybe not more, but just as much of a character as Candace herself was that led to Carrie. Mr. Big was the fully formed one.
Yeah.
That none of the other three women. So we're now going to give the audience this incredible roller coaster ride with Aidan, and we're going to learn so many things about Carrie in the you know, as a result. And by the way, Carrie, like I suggested before, is going to learn a shitload about herself.
Totally.
Well, this is what's interesting to me. You bring that up. Why do you think it is? We don't know because we haven't seen ahead of here. Why do you think it is that Carrie is taken with Aidan? He's successful and he's kind of this other sort of aesthetic. You know, he's handsome. He's got this like dog and stuff. He's from Colorado. You know, he's kind of like a grown up, smart, accomplished, not hippie, but you know, he's a different guy. But is it just that he has like this mystery about him? Is that he's attractive? Like what other side, from where we've seen?
And she's already has made personal concessions for him.
She's giving up smoking.
She's giving up I don't know if she would do something like that or her character would have done something like
I
that.
think she's
for
just
Big.
attracted to the fact that he just throws dogs, just throws them, tosses them.
Throw that dog.
I mean, let's
across
face
the
it,
room.
this is not a radio show. And, you know, one of the things about John Corbett is, look, I think she's attracted to him from across the room. And I think that kind of attraction is her port of entry. And so at the point where she's already talking in the voiceover about, she's already starting to think about, how much she wants. You got to put a lot of that on the fact that he's John Corbett, and he looks like that.
Yeah,
and
he's a dashing man.
It was that one single shot in My Big Fat Greek Wedding that, he basically has these women at hello.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the initial thing. But remember something, he's not in an $8,000 suit and getting out of a town car with a driver like Mr. Big.
Right.
So she's already kind of gone down a path that we haven't seen her go back before.
Also, like that's a whole other thing, like you're saying, to explore. Like there's like the cars and like the rich, but just like wealth aside, he's clearly has enough money to do his thing. But it's like he works with his hands, like he makes furniture. Like I feel like that's so.
They showed that when he was rubbed his hand on that old.
Oh yeah,
Carrie's hand.
Yeah, totally. It's like a whole mentally. It's like a whole different file of man. That's like, oh, you could like fix something,
but
you
it's
could
also
make something.
But it's also more of a meritocracy. If that's, I think that's probably a okay word to use, because this relationship has to earn its own way on the dynamic between the two of them. It's when you're involved with somebody who has the kind of life like Mr. Big, it's easy to let those distractions be like wind at your back, because it's a big life, and it's a nice life, and there's all these creature comforts that come along with it. And even though, you kind of make these kind of negotiations with yourself. Well, it is not this, he's not this, but man, we're going on a great vacation, and man, he's got a beautiful place, and man, he's got whatever.
Right.
Like there's none of that with Aidan now. In fact, it starts off, and Michael Patrick King was so smart, and Darren was so smart about this, which is it not only starts off without those creature comforts to rest on, but it's a pain in the ass, because the first thing he wants her to do is stop smoking.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, really, there's nothing easy about this except for his face and his lovely nature. And thank God, by the way, let's just say this. Thank God Aidan came along, because I will say every time I see one of the early episodes and Carrie is smoking, it's kind of like, it's just so weird.
Yeah,
So
it is.
I have a question about this, and I don't know if you have any inside information on it, but I knew at some point she stopped smoking, and I was wondering, the smoking ban happened in New York City in the early 2000s. I was wondering if there was a time where they were thinking, we have to catch her up to this, and it's already, the show's getting popular. Maybe this is a bad look at this time to have a main character that
how about
smokes.
this? I didn't get a chance to ask her this, but I should ask her, because remember something, it's not like she's faking this. So if I'm Sarah Jessica, who doesn't smoke in real life,
Right.
like at what point do you say, hey, by the way, can you fucking get these cigarettes out of these out of this character,
She's
because
smoking on set.
I'm smoking on set.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
it's
that's
like,
true.
I mean, so I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Sarah Jessica had, the only thing I know about is she had in her contract that she wouldn't do any nudity, but she could have easily had, I'm not going to smoke. But
Right.
I mean, maybe for all we know, she got tired of it too.
Yeah.
But it's not a good look
It's
for
a
anybody.
perfect plot way to introduce it, because it's such high stakes. Like, I don't know if you know people that are hardcore smokers, you know that it's like, man, that's like the real deal. It's like a big thing, and it's better that it's better that it's attached to this person than it is.
Well, it's like when the Lord wants to punish you, he answers your prayers.
Yeah.
That's why I like when the cigarette actually fell into the dirty New York like swamp water too. It's like it wasn't. She was still gonna go get that.
Yeah.
tear
Well, that
the,
was
tear the dirty part
that
off.
was a kind of a big, screw you to the kind of nicotine addiction.
Right.
Here's somebody who's a classy woman who's, foraging around in the sewer water to get a cigarette because you're so addicted.
Yeah.
Such a good shot, like the camera looking down on her and her looking up at him, kind of shrugging, like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because she's just, so there's a bunch of different stuff to get to in this. We've got, so we have Carrie and Aidan. We saw Magnolia for the first time, and that I think is the only time Magnolia is seen in that show. And
That's all from that?
I think so. Or is that not true? We, like I said, we don't know. Is that okay? We're completely
Wait, you
uninformed
think
on
it's
that.
at the bottom of Penn Station right now based on one shot?
That is what I'd heard from someone. I think that's wrong information. But this show completely blew up Magnolia to what it is today.
I blew up cupcakes.
It blew. That's true. Yeah, it blew up cupcakes in general to what it is today. And that's the first time we've seen it at all. And that's when they have the like deal breaker discussion about.
So something that we do on the show is the three of us are all really big fans of Steve. And so we actually have a podcast within our podcast.
And it's called
Steve Talk. And we'd like to do a quick episode of that with you if you don't mind.
It's a favorite
Sure.
time. It's a favorite guy. It's Steve Talk.
Miranda.
Welcome to Steve Talk, an episode where we talk all things Steve. We would love if Cory, who plays Steve here,
That's right.
I would love it if you could maybe react as if you had made that $1 million shot and just kind of see how the episode would have unfolded had you won the $1 million.
Okay, so we're setting the scene.
Yeah.
He's at Madison Square Garden.
He's at Madison Square Garden.
He's about to do the shot.
Yep.
And Miranda has shown up.
Yes.
At this.
Yeah.
She's his strength.
Yes, and she's there. He makes the shot.
Would you like to play Miranda?
In my wildest dreams, I couldn't pull it off.
Would you like to play someone that would have been at Madison Square Garden?
Yeah, we'll be there.
You could just be. You could be.
Does
a guy
Steve
that-
have a last name? Steve. Let's just say Steve.
Let's just say Steve.
Ladies and gentlemen, here he's coming to the half court line.
Oh man, I don't.
Steve.
I think I'm gonna go for it, but
Pretty good.
I thank you because I know you've talked to a lot of famous people, so I think I'm gonna go for it, and this one's for you, baby. Thanks for giving up all your law study this weekend. Here, go! It's good! Oh my God! I'm gonna buy a bar.
That's pretty good.
It's a favorite
Wow.
time.
Here we go.
It's a favorite guy.
You got enough money to buy that suit now.
He's gonna buy that.
It's Steve Talk.
I'm gonna
right.
get me a nice suit.
Yeah, we're all very big fans of Steve. If you couldn't tell from the theme song and the podcast within podcast,
I will say this about Steve, which is like this episode.
Angry Steve.
He had stakes.
There's a lot of emotion.
He finds his cojones.
Yeah.
He stands up to to herself.
Yeah.
And I think that it was interesting to see her reaction because, she was a little startled. And I think that, one has to believe that Miranda liked the fact that he stood up to her and was pissed off that she couldn't find the time to be with him. And she then did something incredibly sweet, which is a bit of an outlier for Miranda sometimes.
Yeah.
And she showed up and surprised him on the playground.
Yeah. That payoff was so good. It was so like heartwarming.
Just his joy of just bricking.
I was worried that it was going to be a big episode because Aidan was introduced and they broke up.
Oh,
That's
yeah,
what I was
that would've
worried
been
about.
awful.
You were thinking
But
that Steve-
hey, by the way, can we squeeze in a little mention for the beautiful, perfect Kristen Davis,
Yes.
who has to have had many scenes where this guy's like
Oh my
licking her
gosh.
face and her chin, and it's like, talk about the Lord's work. I hope she got battle pay for that.
Yeah.
I think that's
episode.
Take
really
32.
that's super interesting when
The
you mentioned that
raw,
because just
chafed chin.
most of her scenes are basically the diner and then just standing out on Park Avenue one night, just filming a guy licking her chin for
I mean,
a 2
come
hour
on.
shoot.
I mean, Samantha winds up in bed. She gets to make out with this gorgeous black guy.
Yeah.
Carrie meets Aidan, and she's having a great time. Miranda's coming to Steve's rescue, and even Stanford's having a little fun. And poor Kristen.
Yeah.
I mean,
She does get the
come on.
shaft more
That
than
is
almost anyone.
That is
Yeah,
the Lord's work in this episode.
She gets makeup put on her. She has a chin hickey. She's referred to as chin.
I mean, it's
I wonder what that audition for that guy was like. Like, he was a great bad kisser.
Yeah.
Those
He
were
was-
disgusting.
Take 34. A little bit more of. Can you run your tongue up the upside of her nose
geez.
and?
More teeth, please. Okay, thank you.
I mean, but I think Kristen gets the award in
Yeah,
this episode.
I would say so.
But I think that the other thing, really, the takeaway for me from this episode is they were really. This is a show that. This is an episode of a show that you just didn't see elsewhere.
Yeah.
You don't see this. I mean, part of why, if we ask ourselves, why did it garner so much attention? This is a show that winds up on the fucking cover of Time magazine. How do you get on the cover of Time magazine? And part of it is because of episodes like this. You're going deep. There's like, I think that there's, it's very raw. And all the characters are experiencing it. And Michael Patrick is just a beautiful writer.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to listen to that full interview.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you did.
absolutely.
I am too.
Yeah, well, please let me know what you guys think of it because, and anybody else who's listening, my email is james@jamesandrewmiller.com.
Great.
Awesome.
And I love hearing from people who listen to the podcast, and I try and spend time every week responding.
That's
Fantastic.
awesome.
That's great. Well, let's do a rapid fire Cosmo rating real quick.
Yeah.
We told you we do a Cosmo rating for everyone. I'll start. I have never done this before, and I'm going to give this a 4.75. That's the highest I've given. 4.75 out of 5. From what you said earlier, there's a formula for this one. There were 5 stories. I feel like they tied it up, and this seems like a huge episode. So that's my rating.
I decided this when I walked in to not be weighed. I'm giving it a 5 Cosmo.
Wow.
I am. I feel like all the expectations were met in a way that even like it kept on going. I'm like, this is like a film. Like it went on longer, but the payoffs were even better. As like each scene, I was like with tying up the Willie Garson thing.
Yep.
Stanford I thought was amazing. I just thought they knocked it out of the park. It's everything that was good, and I feel like by the end of the series, it'll be a top 10 episode. So
John?
I'm gonna go. Oh, man, I'm gonna go 4.75.
all right.
It's just because I want to hold out for something.
Yeah, it was such a great episode, and like you said, all the payoffs were great. Whether it was Carrie slapping on the nicotine patch, Samantha walking away from the guy. Like all the payoffs were great. Miranda down in the playground shooting hoops with Steve. Love the episode. Love the conversations that they all had together. And I'm really excited to learn more about Aidan. So 4.75.
Jim?
So I'm going to give 2 scores, one as an individual episode and one just in terms of the context of the whole series.
Okay.
So the first, in terms of the individual episode, I'm going to give it a 4.75 only because I think that I would have loved Charlotte's character to have a little bit more to do than have her face licked to death. And I also feel like I love Patricia Field, and I always enjoy her. And I felt like, gosh, Kim Cattrall rocked it in this episode in terms of
100%.
fashion.
Yeah.
But I felt like, I felt like the rest of the gang was kind of like a little muted.
Yeah.
I didn't feel, particularly Stanford. I feel like Carrie, she had like one outfit that was kind of cool. But from a fashion point of view, whatever. So I'm going to go with 4. But in terms of the series itself, I'm going to give it 5 because I think that what this episode does, this episode winds up doing so much, including, I think, the biggest thing in the world, because at the end of the day, this show is about relationships. It's about the quest for love, and it introduces, remember something, if we didn't have Aidan, then we're going to get burnt out on Big. There's just so many different, there's just so many things that you can do with Big. The fact that Big comes back, spoiler, the fact that Big comes back, that's fine because then you get to do things because he's come back.
Right.
But I think the creation and the entrance of Aidan into Carrie's life and into all of their lives, because all of them are inextricably linked. And when somebody's going through something, it becomes infectious, and then they all get to think about it and talk about it and be tormented by it or argue about it and view it from different perspectives. I think that was a really, really important thing for the whole shape of the series. And by the way, in the movie, when Aidan comes back, did you guys see the movies?
No.
Not yet. We're gonna.
This is the first time we've watched any of it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's a new thing out. It's called a television, and I will say, and it's amazing because in the world of Sex and the City fans, there are Mr. Big fans and there are Aidan fans.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
we've heard.
not, and they did such a smart job because they cut it close. It's like, it's not that one of them is clearly better than the other or more attractive than the other. They each have their qualities that are, rather compelling for Carrie and for the audience. And the way that they introduce this character, it's really hard to introduce a character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And they just did, I think, a beautiful job. And more importantly, I think this basically is, when when a rocket blasts off and you see it go, and then 2 minutes later, there's like a second stage rocket that kind of like it gives it a further trajectory.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the
What a
episode
great analogy.
that does that. Over, if you're thinking about 6 seasons of a show, and how do you, keep on. It's like a series is like a balloon. You got to keep on pumping it up, and you're trying to figure out all these ways to do it and stuff. And this one, they found a really, really arresting, compelling, infectious way to really. This episode, you'll see, it catapults the series into a whole different narrative. Wow. And so I feel particularly honored that I was here today. Thank you for thank you for working out the schedule. So I would be here.
Oh my gosh! Thank you for coming to Brooklyn.
No
Yes,
fins
thank
or
you.
buts. Well, that one I'll hold against you, but the rest but this episode was fantastic.
Well, thank you. And,
Thank you.
And we know you got to go, but everyone, please listen to Origins. There's so many podcasts out there, and it's like, it's been one of the joys to find one when you're just like, how did I not know this existed? So it's Curb, Saturday Night Live, ESPN, Alabama football, and Sex and the City. It has something for everyone.
So
and
deep.
even if it's something that you're not as interested in, listen to it, because it's just inspirational, and you do an
well, thank
incredible
you.
job. So
Thank you so much. And the
Thank
new
you so much.
the new full interviews are out. They'll be out by the time we release this. They're out next week, you said?
Yep.
Okay.
But am I allowed to invite myself back for the series finale?
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
we'll come to you.
Come to you this time.
Okay, but mark that down. I have a witness because I think that'll be fun. I'll even bring Magnolia Bakery goodies.
All right.
All right. We'll bring you some Brooklyn pizza. Is that a deal?
It sounds like a great exchange.
There you go.
But really, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And you're at Jim Miller on Twitter?
At Jim Miller on Twitter.
We'll be talking.
Although I will admit I don't tweet enough, but I'm trying to get over it.
Perfect.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you, guys.
much.
The Bradshaw Boys stars Cory Cavin, Jon Sieber, and Kevin James Doyle. The show is produced by Jeremy L. Balin. For more information on the guys, check out their website at bradshawboys.com, on social media at The Bradshaw Boys, and if you see them in the street, tip your glass. Thanks for listening.
I'm Irish Catholic. I was raised by nuns. So the fact that the biggest creative explosion in my career was writing about sex is not lost on me. The amount of shameful rocket fuel that came out of me just knowing that I was exploring this very dark area.
But you already explored it within yourself about your own identity, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, that's an extension. It's not.
Well,
you already taken the big first leap about
being
honest,
being
and
sexual at all.
Right.
I'm Irish Catholic, so in an Irish Catholic family, the joke is like coming out that you have sex at all, not that you're coming out as a gay person. It's like, I have sex. That's the shocker. I'm having sex. You don't say that either. So the idea that it all became just a wheelhouse of what I wanted to say about being an outsider, being somebody claiming their own right to not remember. When we were doing the show, there was not a thought that gay people would ever get married, ever. So we were the eternal single people. So it was so easy to fight for those 4 ladies because I was always going to be single. I was somebody who was never going to be married. I understood that there's something that is not available to me, which is what they were afraid of, something not happening for them.